How do you deal with difficult guests? How do you handle those critical guests, the ones who are always late, who complain all the time? What should you do? In this video, we'll discuss that further. Hi everyone, how are you? Welcome to the Etiquette and Protocol channel. I'm Juliana Santiago, and in today's video, we'll discuss how to handle difficult guests. What should you as a hostess do with each type of guest? And to make this video easier, I decided to separate the guests into 4 types. So we're going to talk about 4 types of difficult guests and how you should deal with each of them. The first type of guest we have is the critical guest, so the most critical guest. It's that person who always has something to say about the reception or about someone. That person who likes to criticize usually makes negative comments about the environment, about the situation, and also about the reception. So it's not that positive person, it's someone who really brings extremely negative energy and makes you feel very uncomfortable as a hostess too. Because if you know someone who is more critical, you often put yourself in the position of having to please them all the time because you don't want them to make any kind of criticism. Then you keep looking for ways to please this person so that they'll be a little more restrained and won't make any comments. She claims her criticisms are constructive, but they're usually destructive. The second type of guest is the conversation dominator, someone who talks non-stop. You invite her to your house, but she's always the one who brings up topics. She's always the one who talks. She's always the one who has the right opinion about everything. And she doesn't let anyone else talk. She doesn't let anyone comment on the topic. She monopolizes the conversations too and doesn't give you, the hostess, a chance to participate and be a bit of the protagonist of your own event. And she also doesn't let your guests take part in that moment in general and as a group. We have the third type of guest, which is the inappropriate guest. It's important for us to understand that many times the critical guest is also rude, but the rude guest is that person who doesn't have good behavior. Sometimes they go overboard. Sometimes they don't know the right moment, for example, to stop talking, drinking. They don't really know the right moment to go there and serve themselves, right? Sometimes the hostess keeps calling everyone to serve the lunch that's there for the guests. And the person keeps saying, "Oh, I'll go later." "Oh no, not now. I want to stay here chatting. I don't want to have lunch right now." No. So it's that person who brings problems to the gathering, right? They bring problems, often behavioral issues, and many times also relationship problems with other people. She also can't get along well with the others there. The fourth type of rude guest is the late guest. So it's that person, who arrives long after the reception has started. For example, we schedule the reception at 1 p.m. for lunch. And the person will arrive around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a long time after the scheduled time. Now, have you understood these 4 types of guests? We're going to explore a bit more about how to deal with each of these styles and how you will adapt to rude guests. Also, in a more general way, now we're going to understand some essential points for you to organize yourself and think about before your event. To better deal with your guests, regardless of their profile, I brought only 4 types of guest profiles, but you might have some other problem or some other type of profile that you don't know about. I'll go here. As before, we'll speak more generally. First, think ahead and make a plan before the event. So, if you already know and understand your guests' profiles, it's natural that you'll have a better idea of how to plan your reception. For example, if you know that your guests are mostly older people who like to arrive and eat quickly, they prefer to have their meal and leave because after lunch, for instance, they like to take a nap or rest, or in the case of a dinner, they like to arrive, eat something right away, and don't like the reception to go on for too long. You will create a reception plan and also a reception style that makes sense for this audience. So it's important for us to think about that. Sometimes the type of reception you envision won't suit a certain guest profile, so always think about good planning beforehand. Analyze your guest's profile and see how you will plan and what type of reception you will choose to suit that profile. The time, menu, and event duration will all be tailored to your guest's profile. If you have guests, for example, who like longer gatherings, who enjoy staying late, you should also appreciate and enjoy that. Are you going to choose a reception style that makes sense for this type of profile? If your guests have children or grandchildren who will participate, you'll need a different style. It's important to consider these details when selecting the menu, venue, and reception. The profile of your guests is one of the most important points to help guide the style of your reception and, most importantly, to help with your planning. Another point we also need to understand is a kind of rule setting. And here we're not really talking about rules. You know, like when you make an agreement with your guest, set things up and put a sign on your door with the rules that should be followed. No, I mean an organization of rules that actually make sense to you. For example, what time are you planning your reception? What time are you planning for your reception to end? What do you plan to serve during your event? Where is it going to take place? How is it going to work? What will happen at certain moments? What are you going to serve? How are you going to serve it? How are you going to organize everything you've planned? Establishing these rules and this internal organization will help you guide your guests better, especially in the case of guests with undesirable attitudes or that guest who also has inappropriate behavior. This will really help you with your internal organization. It will prepare you, you know. For example, have you already decided that you're going to serve the lunch you scheduled for 1 o'clock in the afternoon at 2:30? So, if the guest is late and arrives much later than that time, you've already set a rule and an internal organization for how everything will work. So this structure of rules within yourself, with yourself, will really help you not to slip up and also to conduct the event according to what you planned and what you scheduled. Now we're going to talk about during the event. How are you going to deal with each type of guest? What are you going to do with the guest? And also, what are you going to do with each guest? And also, what about the guest? The rules you've already set for your reception, well, in this case, you just need to say, look, I appreciate your suggestion, but I thought of it this way because I like to welcome my guests like this. It's always important when you're going to say something to someone, you don't need to change your tone of voice. If it's something you don't want to accept, a suggestion that someone there is going to offer you, sometimes the person ends up making a criticism that they say is constructive feedback, but in this case, you just need to mention it. Look, I really appreciate it, but I've already thought about doing it this way because later I'm going to serve another dish. Thank you very much, and that's it. Go ahead with the way you've already established because you've already set your rules. You've already made your plans. You've already arranged everything. If someone criticizes or wants to change direction, if you're already prepared and of course with the way you're going to conduct your event, this kind of comment doesn't really affect you and you can handle it really well. Sometimes the person might also criticize something that was presented there. Sometimes they think the food was too salty. Sometimes they think the beer isn't cold enough. Such comments are entirely inappropriate. In this case, you should respond to them like this. Look, maybe you don't like the beer, but there's wine too. What do you think? If the person complains, for example, about the food because they think it's too salty, you can say, oh, interesting, but have you tried the other pasta or have you tried the meat? It might be more to your liking, so give the person another option. Try to change the subject, try to handle it well and avoid these possible criticisms. And another thing, don't let these people who criticize all the time get to you. Remember, this reflects more on them than on you, your hospitality, or your event. You are a good hostess and organizing everything well. There are definitely ways the hostess can welcome guests better. Actually, I even have a course just about that. But it's important for us to understand that guests also need to have manners, good behavior, and proper etiquette. We need to realize that as good hostesses, we're doing our best. Guests also need to respond in a way that matches how we plan our event, okay? So don't take this personally. Usually, when someone is a bit more critical, we already know their personality. They're already recognized that way, even by other people, right? Not just by you. But don't let that make you feel like your event isn't good, you know? So be aware that this is her issue, not yours, about the guest who dominates the conversations. How are you going to deal with that person who spends the whole time telling stories? She's the only one who talks, the only one who has the power to speak. You, as the hostess, have a role in shifting the focus and the center of the conversation, the hostess. She plays a leadership role at an event. And it's important that if you notice there's someone who spends the whole time talking alone, she dominates the topics. You should mention it to that person and say, wow, interesting, Maria, your point of view? Let's see, everyone, what do you think about this topic? Does everyone agree? Try to bring other people into that conversation topic and make sure that person who has more of a guest profile and talks all the time, who is the only one speaking, doesn't dominate the conversation. He should realize that other people also want and deserve their moment to speak, okay? And it's important to emphasize that if you notice you have a guest who dominates the conversation and this behavior of not letting others speak is recurring, it's a good idea that even before the event, you already give them a heads up in a friendly way by talking to them. That you've gathered other people, that there are several people there at that moment, and that you would also like them to participate in some way. But this needs to be done in an individual, delicate way with someone you are close to, okay? It can't be with someone you just met. To give this kind of feedback, it needs to be done in a gentle and empathetic way, okay? For example, if it's my mom, dad, brother, or another family member with a more dominant conversation style, and it's someone I trust enough to be myself around. It's interesting that I do this beforehand so I can create a more pleasant environment for everyone to enjoy the event. Remember that, as the hostess and leader, it's essential for you to try to shift the focus of the conversation as well. For example, try to introduce new topics and bring up new subjects. This way, you also have your moment to speak and your moment to take the lead. At that event, bring up new topics and don't let just the conversation dominator lead the subjects that will be discussed there. Now, we're going to talk about the rude guest, who is that person that ends up making rude comments to other guests or even to the hostess. It's that person who also has rude behavior. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, sometimes it can be someone who drinks too much, someone who is extremely impolite. They bring up topics that aren't of interest to the group, talk about extremely personal matters, bring gossip, things you don't want to discuss or even mention at your event. How do you deal with this kind of person? What if the person makes an inappropriate comment about someone or brings up some gossip, some topic you don't consider relevant? If there's something about their behavior, something they say or mention that you don't approve of, you can simply end that topic. So if the person comes and says like, guys, did you see that Maria got divorced? As a hostess, I can say, yes, I saw that. I don't think she wants to discuss this subject. It's extremely delicate. But are you all going to take part in that event that's happening in our city, the one that's going to be at the mall this weekend, that exhibition? Are you excited to go? I ended the topic, I said it wasn't appropriate, and I brought up another subject right there in the same conversation. That already shifts the focus and brings a new atmosphere to the environment. Be very careful as well with guests who are inappropriate with other guests. Protect your guests. If you notice someone repeatedly asking rude questions or bringing up topics the other person wants to avoid, you just end the conversation. For example, imagine Maria and João as a couple. Then someone asks, wow, Maria and João, aren't you going to have kids? Then you can protect the guests, right? You can try to end that topic and answer for them as well. If you notice that they felt a bit insecure, that they didn't like the question, should you also protect your guests then? Then you can answer, wow, you're really curious, aren't you? How are things going with your kids? Let us know. Also, changing the subject. Whenever someone brings up a topic you don't want to continue, just end it in a light way. If you want, you can add some humor and then bring up another topic now about inappropriate behaviors. A person who is always rude to guests, someone who sometimes drinks too much at events and gives you a lot of trouble. If this is a frequent behavior, it's a good idea for you to talk to the person, right? Even before the event happens, you should point out that some of her behaviors are not acceptable to you as the hostess. Of course, when correcting someone in advance, we need to do it carefully with kindness, respect, and empathy. This also needs to be done, right? This kind of feedback, this kind of attention that you give to the person before your event. It should be done with people you are close to. There's no point in doing this with someone you just met. It won't be considerate. We also have the late guest, which, by the way, is the type of situation I get the most questions about. What should I do with my guest who doesn't arrive on time? And that's why at the beginning of the video, I talked about planning and setting rules for your event. If you have rules about the schedule, about when each thing will happen at your event, the late guests will have to adapt. So, if your event is a lunch and it's scheduled for 1 in the afternoon, but the person arrives at 4 or 3, they'll arrive and the event will already be happening. Why? Because when you organize your event, you set rules about what time each thing would happen. So, it's important for us to think about that, okay? And don't change the organization of your event because of the late guest. And if you know that someone frequently arrives late to your events, you can mention Maria. The event is scheduled for 1 o'clock, so it's important to emphasize that by 2 o'clock, I already plan to serve lunch. And then do you already mention the rules of your event to her? What you planned at the beginning. Of course, you're not going to say everything you planned, all those rules, right? Because here we're working with rules, like a script for an event. But you already mentioned it to her, so she understands that if she arrives late, she'll miss some things. And it's important for us to emphasize that this organization of your event is essential. And both the planning and these rules, the script and the way you conduct your event, especially in the case of the hostess, are fundamental to the success of that meeting, of that moment you create. And as I said at the beginning of the video, I have a course about hosting at home, right? It's called Hosting at Home, the Hostess's Etiquette. It's a course that I've been teaching since 2015, and it's one of the biggest successes of our school. If you haven't taken this training yet and want to know more, like how to better welcome your guests and deal with difficult guests, in my training, I provide thorough explanations. If you haven't participated yet, use the coupon YouTube for your first course purchase on our website. I'll leave the link below, sign up now, and I'll be waiting for you there. Now, we need to think about the post-event and some points that we can analyze first. We need to understand what difficult situations you went through during your event, especially with the guests, those more difficult guests. What were the situations that happened during your event that you wouldn't want to happen again? It's interesting for you to think about this, because then what are we going to do? When it's time to establish the rules for our next event, for your next event, you'll already set this as a point of attention. So take a look at your event and analyze it. What could have been better? And also, how could you have handled difficult situations with difficult guests in the best way? Because it's natural in the beginning for us to slip up, not know what to do. That's why we need to carefully analyze what happens so that if it happens again, we can handle it better. This is also about the hostess adjusting her behavior, and it's important for us to remember that the hostess can't lose her composure, right? So we know that delicate situations happen, rude guests show up at our events, and people do things that often make us extremely uncomfortable and out of place. And it's important for us to understand a bit more that many times you, as the hostess, really should know how to handle things better at your events. So, I hope this video has helped you. And if you want to learn a bit more about hostess etiquette, click here on the side to watch this video. Right after that, I'm sure it will really add to the content of this video. Now, about difficult guests, tell me what kind of difficult situation a guest has caused. Or something that happened at your house that you, as the hostess, didn't know how to handle. Maybe I'll return to record a video commenting on situations you send. What do you think? Leave your comments. I'll stop for now. See you next time.